Hello guys, I am Shrikant Ruikar from the Department of English, Vivekanand College, Kolhapur. Welcome to another video which is based on the theatre of absurd. Now let us see what are the various details of this very literary movement. The theatre of absurd, the term was coined by Martin Esslin, who wrote a book, The Theatre of the Absurd, in 1961. The movement Theatre of Absurd began around 1950 and it continued till 1980. It came to an end with the death of Samuel Beckett in 1989. Broadly speaking, it can be applied to a number of works in drama and prose which suggest that the human condition is essentially absurd. Among other things, the literature has its roots in the fiction of Franz Kafka, the author of The Trial and Metamorphosis. Franz Kafka was the influential writer of the 20th century literature. He wrote short stories, novellas, and novels. He is considered a modernist writer along with James Joyce, Virginia Woolf, and D.H. Lawrence. The theatre of the absurd came about as a reaction to World War II. In the World War II, that which took place in the year 1939, a lot of people lost their lives. Nearly 48 million people were killed. There was a great deal of suffering. There was doubt and fear. The whole atmosphere was full of pessimism and negativity, which led to the rise of absurd theatre. It took the basis of existential philosophy and combined it with dramatic elements to create a style of theatre which presented a world which cannot be logically explained. Life is, in word, absurd. Needless to say, this genre of theatre took quite some time to catch on because it it used techniques that seemed to be illogical to the theatre world. The plots often wandered from the traditional episodic structure and seemed to move in a circle, ending the same way it began. The scenery was often unrecognizable, and to make matter worse, the dialogues were never seemed to make any sense. Now, let us see the another part of this very absurd theatre. As a term, the theatre of absurd is a term coined by Hungarian born critic Martin Eslin, who made it the title of his 1961 book, The Theatre of Absurd, on the subject. The term refers to a particular type of play which first became popular during 1950s and 1960s and which presented on stage the philosophy explained by French philosopher Albert Camus in his 1942 essay The Myth of Sisyphus, in which he defines the human conditions as essentially meaningless. Camus argued that humanity had to resign itself, recognizing that fully satisfying rational explanation of the universe was beyond its reach. In that sense, the world must ultimately be seen as absurd. Eslin regarded the term theatre of the absurd merely as a device by which he meant to bring attention to certain fundamental qualities recognized in the works of range of playwrights. The playwrights, loosely grouped under the label of the absurd, try to convey their sense of bewilderment, anxiety, and wonder in the face of unexplainable universe. According to Eslin, the five important playwrights of the movement are Eugene Ionesco, Samuel Beckett, Jean Genet, Arthur Admo, and Harold Pinter. Although these writers were not always comfortable with the label and sometimes preferred to use term as anti-theater or new theater. Other playwrights associated with this type of theater include Tom Stoppard, Arthur Kopit, Frederick Dernmatt, Fernando Arrabal, Edward Albee, Boris Vian, Peter Weiss, Vaclav Havel, and Jean Tardieu. Now let us see the other part of this very literary movement. The morality plays of the Middle Ages may be considered as a precursor to the theatre of the absurd, depicting everyman type characters dealing with allegorical and sometimes existential problems. World War II was the catalyst that finally brought the theater of the absurd to life. The global nature of this conflict and the resulting trauma of living under threat of nuclear destruction put into stark perspective the essential precariousness of human life. The theater of the absurd is precisely the new theater that Artaud dreamt of. The theater of cruelty developed by Antoine Artaud aimed to shock audiences through gesture, image, sound, and lighting. It openly rebelled against conventional theater. It was, as UNESCO called it, anti theater. It was surreal, illogical, conflictless, and plotless. And not surprisingly, the public's first reaction to this new theater was incomprehension and rejection. The most famous and most controversial absurdist play is probably Samuel Beckett's Waiting for Godot. Abstract drama uses conventionalized speech, cliches, slogans, and technical jargon, which it distorts, parodies, and breaks down. By ridiculing conventionalized and stereotyped speech patterns, the theater of the absurd tries to make people aware of the possibility of going beyond everyday speech, conventions, and communicating more authentically. Now, let us see what are the main beliefs. The absurdist playwrights believe that our existence is absurd because we are born without asking to be born, we die without seeking death, and we live between birth and death, trapped within our body and reason, unable to conceive of a time in which we are not, for a time in which we are not to be, for nothingness is very much like the concept of infinity. We will be able to achieve distinction and permanence only to find that our assessments are respectively incomplete and therefore never completely effective. All of our creations are doomed to decay as we ourselves are doomed to death. We create an order to identify ourselves in some semblance, permanence, but our creations become autonomous, autonomous facts. The instant we have created them and not and do not identify us except in so far as we pretend what they do. Therefore, the more we try to find one definition and permanent distinction, the more absurd we are. Now, let us see what are its main characteristics. According to the absurdist, the writers, life is essentially meaningless, so it is miserable. There is no hope because of the inevitable futility of man's efforts. Reality is unbearable unless relieved by dreams and illusions. Man is fascinated by death, which permanently replaces dreams and illusions. There is no action for plot. Very little happens because nothing meaningless can happen. The final situation is absurd or comic. Absurd is not purposeful and specific as it solves no problems. It is like an abstract painting which is supposed not to convey a definite meaning. So these are the some of the characteristics of the absurd of the theater. Now let us see the contribution. The first one who is the Samuel Beckett. Samuel Beckett is probably the most well known of the absurdist playwrights because of his work Waiting for Godot. Beckett's play seemed to focus on the themes of the usefulness of human action and the failure of the human race to communicate. He was born on April 13th, 1906, in Ireland. In the 1930s and 40s, Beckett published many works in the form of essays, short stories, poetry, and novels. But very few people noticed his work. In fact, he only sold 95 copies of the French translation of his novel Murphy in 4 years. His post war era fame only came about in the 1950s when he published three novels and his famous play Waiting for Godot. Waiting for Godot is probably the most famous absurd play till date. The characters of the play are absurd caricatures, who, of course, have problems communicating with one another, and the language they use in is quite often ludicrous. And following the cyclical pattern, the play seems to end in the same state it began in without really changed. The play is about two tramps who are Estragon and Vladimir. These two persons are continuously awaiting for the arrival of mysterious Godot, who will in some unexplained way make everything different, but who never comes. The two tramps are still waiting for Godot when the play ends. Vladimir says God will come and will be saved, and if we drop him he will punish us. The next writer is Eugene Ionesco. He is a leading figure in the theater of absurd. Eugene Ionesco's main focus is on the futility of communication. So the language of his plays often reflect this by being almost completely nonsensical. He approaches the absurdity of life by making his characters comical and unable to control their own existence. Ionesco was born in Romania, but he grew up in Paris with his mother. After 13 years in Paris, he returned to Romania, where he had to learn his native language. He attended the University of Bucharest, then taught in high school French. Then in 1936, he got married. His famous plays are The Bald Prima Donna, The Lesson, The Chess, The Victim of Duty, How to Get Rid of It, The Killer, Rhinoceros, and King, Exit the King. Then we have Harold Pinter, who was a British dramatist, screenwriter, director, and actor. He was a Nobel Prize winner. Pinter was one of the most influential modern British dramatists with a writing career and spanned more than 50 years. His best known plays include The Birthday Party, The Homecoming, and Betrayal, each of which he adapted for the screen. His screenplay adaptations of other works include The Servant, The Go Between, The French Lieutenant's Woman, The Trial, and he also directed and acted in radio, stage, television, and film productions of his own and others' works. Then we have Edward Albee. Edward Albee, widely considered the foremost American playwright of his generation, whose psychologically shrewd and piercing dramas explored the controversy of intimacy, the gap between self delusion and truth, and the budding desperation beneath the appearance of contemporary life. Mr. Alby's career began after the death of Eugene O'Neill and after Arthur Miller and Tennessee Williams had produced most of their best known plays. From them, he inherited the torch of American drama, carrying it through the era of Tony Kushner's and Angels in America, August Wilson and his Pittsburgh cycle, and into the 21st century. He introduced himself suddenly and with a bang in 15 no, sorry in 1959 when his first produced play, The Zoo Story, opened in Berlin. His notable works are Who is Afraid of Virginia Woolf, A Delicate Balance, The American Dream, The Zoo Story, Seascape, The Sandbox, Occupant, The Play About the Baby, Three Tall Women, and At Home and at the Zoo. Among Alby's early one act plays, The Zoo's Story, The Sandbox, and The American Dream were the most successful and established him as a skilled critic of American values. But it is his first full length play, Who is Afraid of Virginia Woolf, that remains his most important work. In this play, a middle aged professor, his wife, and a younger couple engage one night in an unrestrained drinking, witticism, and peaceful self revealing confrontations. In addition to writing, Albee produced a number of plays and lectured at schools throughout the country. He was awarded the National Medal of Arts in 1996. A compilation of his essays and personal anecdotes, Stretching My Mind, was published in 2005. The year Albee also received a Tony Award for Lifetime Achievement. Who is Afraid of Virginia Woolf is a play in three acts by Edward Albee, published and produced in 1962. The action takes place in a living room of middle-aged couple, George and Martha, who have come home from a faculty party drunk and quarrelsome. When Nick, a young biology professor, and his wife, Honey, stop by for a nightcap, they are enlisted as fellow fighters and the battle begins. A long night of malicious games, insults, humiliations, betrayals, painful confrontations, and savage witticism occurs. The secrets of both couples are laid bare and illusions are viciously exposed when, in a climatic moment, George decides to kill the son they have invented to compensate for their childlessness. George and Martha finally face the truth in a quiet ending to noisy play, stand together against the world, sharing their sorrow. Then we have Arthur Admo. Arthur Admo was a playwright, one of the foremost exponents of the theater of the absurd. He was a Russian born dramatist who lived in France and wrote in French. He expressed a deep sense of alienation in his autobiographical work El Avu, which is the best example of absurd theater. His selected famous plays are The Confession, The Parody, The Invasion, The Grand and Small Maneuver, The Way to Go, All Against All, Professor Tarrant, Ping Pong, Spring, The Politics of Rubbish, Here and Now, Holy Europe, Mr. Moderate, and If Summer Came Again. Then we have Jean Genet. Jean Genet was a French novelist, playwright, poet, essayist, and political activist. Early in his life, he was a vagabond and pretty criminal, but the latter took but he latter took to writing. His major work include the novels The Thief's Journal and Our Lady of the Flowers, and the plays written by him are The Balcony, The Maids, and Death Watch. The blacks and the screens. He is classified as the dramatist of the absurd and follower of art, and in his artistic theatre of cruelty, the world of his drama is marked with violence and unnatural passion. So that's the end of this discussion and study. I thank you all for watching this video, and thank you.